Hi, Bess. Maybe you want to tell us your full name before we begin?
Yes, happy to. My full name is Jittida Haputpong. If you're familiar with the culture here, I am from Thailand. Although that's my full name, most of my peers, my family and friends call me by Best. That's the name that I go by, and it's what my customers also call me. So John and I know each other as John and Best. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe we can start off with telling us a bit about yourself. What do you do for now?
Of course. So I currently am part of this sort of growth stage startup now. We are about 5.5 years old. We started our company towards the end of 2015, based out of Singapore. If you know this region well, our company name is called Igloohome. So I run the business development team for Igloocompany. I've been doing this for the last 4 years. Based out of Singapore, there are a couple of team members who are scattered around the world, mostly in Europe, out of APAC, and we also have counterparts out in the US for us. So the company does IoT, smart connected devices, and also certain automation for the prop tech industry.
Yeah. So a lot of acronyms here, a
Yeah.
lot of deep stuff. What's IoT? What's PropTech? If you could give some introduction to that, that'd be
Of
helpful.
course. So IoT in a nutshell stands for Internet of Things. If you really want to think about what is IoT in your life, so if you're a homeowner, you probably have heard of a Google Home or an Alexa or a HomeKit. These are connected devices that allow you to do certain things and capture information through the internet and automate workflows that you may have, whether it's unlocking your front door, switching on your lights, even running the laundry machine while you're away. So these are all like Internet of Things, connected devices that sort of enhance the way you live. Prop tech is short for property technology. So it's a focused technology range of technology that really targets the property sector, whether that's from construction to actually living, to post maintenance. It's a pretty wide spectrum, and we sort of sit in both because we do smart access, which is it's just IoT device, but at the same time also helps certain customers solve their property management pain points. Yeah, so that's what it is in a
Got it.
nutshell.
Yeah. I mean, I asked you to give us more color and elaboration about what's IoT and PropTech. I think because if someone outside of tech looking at tech, I think they'll probably know fintech, which is finance tech.
Yes.
And I think IoT and PropTech probably are not the most popular segment of tech. So thanks for giving us that illustration. And how long has Zigo been?
We celebrated our 5th year last year. So we're sort of in between that age now. We're going to turn 6 this year. It feels a lot longer in startup years. And I think you know that well as well, having
Yeah.
been with us for quite some time.
Yeah.
Yes.
What was your first job?
Yeah. I was lucky enough to secure a job at a market research firm before I graduated. Having graduated with an economics degree, I thought I really wanted to get into like research and analytics. And after a couple of months, I realized that's not really what I wanted to do. It's fun to study about it in school, but when you're sitting in front of your laptop or PC all day, just calling clients to interview about their market size and sales last year to try to compile a report, it's not really as fun. And I missed like the social aspect of being university. I think I had a shock during my transition. Being surrounded by friends at university, like having constant company 24/7, and all of a sudden you have to switch into an adult mode after graduation, and you find yourself like alone at your desk and in the office. I couldn't adjust very well. To be completely honest, like I went into this like hole of I wouldn't call it, like a depression state of any sort, but I did. Felt like I just didn't want to continue anymore. I wanted to take a break. So
When
this
was
was
this?
back in 2012, and it lasted from about after I graduated all the way until October. So I think about from May June all the way to October, where one, I was trying to force myself to accept that this is it. Like this is just part of growing up. I just have to accept reality. Fighting with that other internal voice in my head that wow, is this really it? Is this all there is? Is this, it's like, the first 20 plus years of my life is fun, and here on out, there's nothing else to look forward to. So I think I was really battling with that. And I personally just felt it was, also at that point talking to my parents, they all just felt it was safer. Like, maybe you should just come home for a bit. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was when I think my career really shifted. Happened to be having lunch with an old university mate in Singapore while I was sort of not really happy with the market research firm that I was working at. She made a comment that this management trainee program that she was at with IBM, that was a company, was actually looking for another cohort of management trainees to be based in Bangkok. I thought it was fate. I applied for it. Next thing I know, spent the next 3 to 5 years at IBM. And that was my segue into tech.
My questions in my head is that have you looked back and wondered that if you did not really conform to the belief held by the majority about rushing to get a job, maybe you wouldn't have ended up at that market research firm that you took as the first job? Have you ever wondered about that?
For sure. I think definitely had I not rushed into that first role, I had given myself a lot more opportunity, right, and credit to keep my options open to try, I probably would not have found myself taking on a job before I graduated, before I even figured out what I wanted to do. I think signing on to that job was definitely out of conformity and the need to really fit in. And I mean, yeah, and Singapore is not a cheap place to continue living in. It's also that as well. But you're absolutely right. And I think that's something maybe our generation, you aside, right? Because you had an interesting journey. Or like probably I speak for myself. Probably I didn't have the guts to really go do it. But I see a lot more younger generation come out of university, start themselves, refusing to conform, and I admire that. Yeah.
I mean, from my perspective, I don't think that you wasted those months at the market research firm, because they kind of confirmed that there's not a kind of life, the kind of industry or job that you want. I don't think it was any wasted value. And I think one of the things I always believe in is that there's no wasted experience, right? It's either you succeed, you know something about yourself, you learn something about yourself. And if things didn't go as well as you have thought, you learn something, right? And then you move on, and then you may never look back again. But if you don't try it, that thought could always be at the back of your mind down the road, and that may not be healthy as well. So I was just curious, and thanks for being so candid about that. So let's talk about IBM, right? And this was a job in Bangkok.
Yeah.
Spent how long at IBM?
Almost 4 years. It was a pretty defining first job for me. It was where I made the most peers in the industry within tech as well. Sort of made a lot of contacts and mentors through that journey. And it was the career that sort of made me realize I didn't necessarily want to stay in the business side of things. And that to me means like financial services, retail F&B and all that. I want to sort of get into the tech side. And it was sort of like a good segment into learning more about tech while still like having a proper cushioned job. Yeah.
Why this thinking?
Interesting that you ask. I would say that it is at that point, and this was in 2012, 2013, right? Over in the US, it's pretty late to the boom already. A lot of companies that are just on their way to becoming unicorns are already on their way there. But in Asia, like that's just starting out, right? So we're starting to hear about the first startup that's about to make it, the second startup, and like all this fundraising world. And I didn't know back then how to really get into startup. One, I also wasn't comfortable starting it on my own. But I think joining a tech company gives you the exposure you need to understand like certain technology stacks, what's really available, what really could be done. And a company like IBM, right, like other big tech firms, really has the resources and the capabilities to train up their youth in a company do really, really well, there's really an abundance of resources you can tap into that you could learn from. And I think it's exciting. It's I think even back then, right? Like working on because coming from an sort of an economics financial background, a lot of the projects I got thrown on was in the financial services industry. So we did a lot of core banking transformation technology, service excellence, front office, so like branches, transformation journey, how to shorten the time to open a bank account. So these were very exciting projects that when that's something that you can touch and that's something that you can see. And so I think that was the big thing about tech as well that really sort of drew me into it a lot more. Yeah.
So that was what I was going to ask you about. I mean, you did economics in a business university in Singapore, and then you joined IBM. So I was trying to find your first interest, the first root of your interest into tech. Would you say that it's from IBM? Would IBM account for your source of your affection and direction towards tech?
Absolutely. I think prior to that opportunity, I was very narrow in terms of my mindset on how I was perceiving what a cool job was. And back then it was to join a bank, like pretty much. And at IBM, I realized there was a lot more to the world than just the financial industry. You can do so much more. And I even remember going into the first few projects that I had, I was still quite stubborn. Wanted to make sure that I always sat on the business side of the project. So whether that was a business analyst role or just a strategy consultant, I never wanted to ever be involved in the technical side, only to realize later on that that's actually what's in demand. That's the skill set that people really look out for, is someone who can sort of have a business acumen, but at the same time understand the technical aspects of how things actually get done. And once I started seeing that, my mindset completely shifted. I started getting a lot more interested in how the technology actually is built in and of itself. And so those 3.5 years at IBM was a huge turning point in my career to sort of steer me towards a more tech.
What you do in IBM again? You said it's a management training.
It was a management training kind of role. I mean, the program was actually called the Consultant by Degree. I think today there's probably hundreds of us now across Asia Pacific. So I think there were cohorts across Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia. These were three main countries that they were recruiting from. And then so you either can grow into a sort of a management consultant track as on the business side. You can also go into as technical as a enterprise architect on the technical side. So they really train you with all the skills that you will need to grow within their consulting organization. Not a lot of people know that IBM has this. IBM from outside seems like a very big tech that just does software implementation, like maybe some AI. But to be fair, I think in a lot of the projects that IBM are in, we do have a pretty big consulting capability. That's how they usually come to us first, right? Before paying millions of dollars, they need to pay a lot less to make sure that this is something that they want to do. And so that's where we go in. We sort of go in to analyze what is the current as is and like what it could be, like so a to-be state for them. And it's what is required to get done. And then we win that project, the implementation team then comes in to set everything up in place for the clients. Yeah.
And this program was what, 3 years? 1 year?
2 years.
2 years.
2 years. And as part of that sort of graduation, you either get promoted or you sort of stay on, you change careers and you change track. And then you sort of graduate into becoming a senior consultant that you can go on to your own billable projects. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe if you could name an example of a situation at IBM where you saw that tech skills or tech expertise is actually in demand, I think that would be helpful to the audience.
Yeah.
Was there any specific example or situation that you realized that actually this skill is actually very much in demand?
A couple of examples come to mind. But maybe one interesting one that I happened to be on for quite some time was a core banking transformation like project for clearly one of the banks. And as part of that journey, we spent a lot of nights in the data center running batches to do upgrades, right, on all the applications that required upgrade, whether it's ATM, whether it's customer information systems, so like all sorts of core banking products. And I think as part of sort of seeing the demand there, you see a lot of in the data center war room, right? You see a lot of like business people sort of there, like hanging out and just sort of talking to each other, keeping it entertained at like 1 or 2 in the morning to get through the night. But then when something really, really happens, like when something goes wrong and there's a batch file that's corrupted and something has to be fixed, like the business people is completely irrelevant. You know, like we have to call in enterprise architecture or a very, very technical guy to come in and fix the problem. There's so few of them that you sort of, you can have this whole list of program managers, and they're all like business people who are managing all of this. And then against their name, technical leads, it's the same people again and again and again. And I think this is quite common in like the world that we live in as well, where there are a lot of like business people, there are people who want to make business decisions, and there are very few who actually know the technical know-how, whether it's doable or not. So I think that was probably the first time I ever realized, wow, there's a lot of people who wants to influence decision, but only understand the business, and there are very few who actually need it in time of like a critical issue, and there are just too few of them. Yeah.
So let me do a recap, right, of your journey so far, right? You finished your 4 years in economics at SAP.
Yeah.
And then you joined a market research firm for a few months, and then right away you thought that it was fate, right? That you missed a bit. You missed home in Bangkok for a bit, and then this opportunity came to join IBM as a management trainee. So moving on from IBM, what do you do next? What's your next adventure?
It was a short one. So I think after being at IBM for close to 4 years, I think one of the things I kept itching on was I wondered how a business unit that we proposed our solutions to would think. What's their qualification process, and how do they go about picking which firms implement this, and how actually that gets done, right? So long story short, I ended up joining a bank. Because I've been consulting on so many banking projects, I decided I wanted to know what it was like working on the other side. I think the number of months I was there, which was less than 10, speaks for itself that I really didn't have the time of my life. Although I did learn a lot, again, I was pretty much still within the tech sector. I joined them as the product manager of the e-commerce solution. So that was corporate mobile and internet banking products. So it's still very much close to this, tech itself.
In Thailand?
In Thailand, correct. Yes.
Thailand.
Yes.
Got it. So you graduated from business school and then went to technology, and then now you came back to a bank, but still in the tech realm of things.
Absolutely.
And if you look back, right, at the time, when was this again?
This was in 2015. 15 already at that point. Yeah.
And what would have been the typical career progression if you had stayed on?
I joined them as an assistant vice president. In a couple of years, probably would have made it to VP. In a couple of years, would have made it to SVP. Then you probably made it to an executive VP level. It was quite clear. I think when you're in a corporate, they make it quite clear this is your career path and where you can grow. And so it is just basically doing well, clocking your years, and just knowing the right people and growing. That's really the recipe to a corporate success. Yeah.
Yeah, but of course you were not happy there in banking.
Yes.
And where do you end up after this bank?
It was again, I think by luck or fate, one of my peers in the consulting program at IBM, he was based out of Singapore. We met. And then in Bangkok, he was there on a trip. We met up, and he sort of led me in on this new opportunity that he's been working on for a couple of months now. And the opportunity back then was Igloohome, right? So which is today we know this company as Igloocompany, but back then we were called Igloohome. So we sat down, had coffee in one of the malls in Bangkok, and he started sharing with me that he had put a sort of a pause on IBM, decided to take 1 year off from them, didn't quit entirely, but decided to take 1 year off to go help his friend run this new company, which is there to sort of solve problems for Airbnb host. That was the sole mission statement of Igloohome back then, is to help Airbnb host around the world, especially out of Asia Pacific, to be able to rent out their properties without having to be there in person all the time. So that was sort of a way into IoT as well. Sooner rather than later, that conversation sort of turned into, hey, by the way, we're looking for a Thai country manager. Would you be interested in joining? And I was probably having a very bad day or week at work. And so it was sort of music to my ears to hear that. Again, also been thinking about sort of making a move to a startup, just didn't know which company, didn't have the time to do the research. So this worked out very well. Decided to sort of continue the conversation with his friend, who happens to be the CEO of the company, who we know well. And I think fast forward a couple of months, end up joining Igloohome full time. So I think Igloohome must have been about 4 months old. Very, very young. Yeah.
And you said that you were already at the back of your mind considering to join a startup. Why? Why was that so?
The reason I joined the bank was because I wanted to be able to do more. So rather than sort of give advices or suggestions on what you can do to sort of get to that state, I thought by being in a bank and actually sitting on the business user side, I would get to implement technology. But it didn't turn out to be the case. And then so that was when I made a conclusion. It's probably got nothing to do with who you are, whether you're a bank or whether you're a consulting firm. It is probably the size of the company in which they operate as. And because they're too big, there were too many considerations, too many regulations they have to weigh out. And the only way to sort of eliminate that is to be part of a smaller scale company. And then so this startup concept was just hot and coming back then. And so I just started looking into it, didn't dedicate like a long time to really research yet. So by the time Igloohome came around, I think the mindset was like, let's give it a shot. Who knows? Maybe it won't work out. Maybe it will.
Yeah, but it wasn't such an easy decision.
No, yeah.
And I'm sure like the financial aspects, the elements was one of them. I'm curious, you mentioned that Igloohome was probably a few months old, and you were told that they're looking for a Thai country manager.
Yeah.
And why was that so? And maybe before that, maybe you want to tell us a bit more about the problem Igloohome was trying to solve back then, and why Thailand?
Of course. So we, again, going back to expand on what I meant by the company having a mission statement of eliminating pain points for Airbnb hosts. So at that point, the Airbnb product is quite famous already, although it's not as sort of mainstream as we know it today, but it was quite synonymous with like the cool tech sector. So everyone wanted to be the Airbnb of something, right? And so we wanted to be their partner, and I think we were lucky enough to actually get that partnership set out in the US before I spoke to them. When we sort of brought back the brand to Singapore, and that's where most of the management team and the co-founders based themselves out of, they realized Singapore was quite a small market to target if we wanted to target Airbnb as a sector. So we looked for sort of the surrounding countries to see like which countries in the region, which is ASEAN, right, as a region, had a big Airbnb portfolio, and Thailand came up like really, really early on. It's a country where there's a lot of real estate development, where there's a lot of foreign investment who have secondary properties. It's of course very attractive to foreigners who just want to come and stay for a longer time, or maybe come for a short period. So it had a lot of Airbnb potential, pretty much. And because as a company who wants to solve pain points for Airbnb hosts, we had to follow the market that had a lot of Airbnb properties. So that's what they were looking for. They started looking for someone who could size out the market, sort of come up with a go-to-market plan on how to tackle Thailand as an Airbnb market, go after all the hosts, come up with solutions, and work with the tech side to do that. So that's how it really came about. The conversation steered towards just focusing on Thailand right at the beginning.
At which stage did you get connected with the CEO? And how, walk us through how did this offer and opportunity landed?
Sure. I think it came up quite early on. So even in the first conversation we had at a coffee shop, it already came up. I think it was something that my friend sort of preempted that like, okay, this might be a problem, so let's just throw it out there. And it was just lucky that at that point I really wasn't thinking so much about it. I was quite young. I was in my mid-20s, and so I had made a decision that if I were to join a startup, I would be willing to either take a pay cut or know that I won't be paid a competitive rate. In return, take out equity from the company so that we're incentivized to make sure that the company is a success. So pretty much the conversation was quite easy. And it's usually how much you're making now. They're not going to raise it. They're not in a position to be able to raise it. They're lucky if they can match it. And if they can't match it, they will give you sort of an equity package based on how you negotiate to sort of make sure you're compensated enough or you have an upside to want to come join. So it is really a combination of what you minimally would want to take out as a savings and like a cash safety net today. But at the same time, that's nowhere a enticing offer, if I have to say, but the allure of being part of a company that you are also having stake in is a more attractive part. And I think that's sort of one thing as well. I always tell people who want to join early stage companies that you need to make sure you have the risk appetite for the next couple of years. I'd say 5 years minimally. And if you're able to do that and the company is successful and you're part of that journey, you make sure that it's successful as well, you will have more upsides. Yeah, but yeah.
5 years is what you said.
5 years is minimally.
And how many years has it been now?
It's been 5.5, and we're still working hard every day to get to where we want to be. Yeah.
And back then you were in Bangkok, Thailand.
Yeah.
And was this role is going to be Thailand country manager, so that means you're going to be based in Thailand.
And I was ecstatic with it, right? I mean, at that point, I wasn't thinking about moving, personal reasons as well as just I was comfortable there. So when this came in, I just had this mentality that all right, I'll leave my job, which I eventually did, a few months after, and started working on this full time. And within, I'd say about 3 weeks, the CEO reached out and said, we talk all the time anyway, but then he asked, hey, can you come to Singapore for a while just to help out? Because we're about to set up operations here. We just need all hands on deck. And I said, like, yeah, sure. I'll come. I packed like a hand luggage to carry on, and I ended up staying for 3 months. And at the end of that 3 months, we decided to change my role and sort of turned me into a more regional, global partnership person / business development. That's the thing as well. You really never really know like what you're doing. I look back now and it's really hard for me to describe what my job was because it's about 10 things at a time. But it was a commercial role. It was whatever email came in, you reply kind of role. And if there's a trade show, you go and you try to sell kind of role. And that was fun. That was what was fun about it. And I guess it was a big change as well after staying in Singapore for about 3 months and then having to make a decision like whether I was gonna continue or not. I think luckily for them, I didn't have a choice. I'd already left my job, so I just felt like okay, there's only one way forward, and let's just go. So here I am.
Which employee number were you?
Ooh.
Less than 10.
Less than 10. I'm going to pinpoint it to about employee number 6 or number 7. Yeah, because there were quite a number of, the company started with 4 co-founders. I think at the point I joined, there were 3. And there were really early employees that have been with them. I think about 4 people already. And then so I'd say I was employee number 6 or 7. Yeah, around there. Yeah.
And I want you to provide a glimpse of what happened with you in terms of a startup interview. How many rounds were there? What kind of questions were you asked?
I spoke with my friends, so that was, I didn't realize it then, but then I realized it now. That was definitely round number 1. Yeah. Then I spoke with the CEO and the head of sales and marketing in the same round. So that was round number 2. Also had a couple of side chats with each of the co-founder. I think when you're quite young, all the co-founders want to talk to you to make sure that you're coming in to add value to the company. So I also had a chat with all the 3 co-founders separately as well, also in the same call. I think the interview was less structured as it could have been, but I think one of the things to take note is there always are case studies and deliverables that startups would want you to put together before you join. And then so to me, there were a lot of asks on doing go-to-market strategy, doing market sizing, coming up with plans on how we were to tackle it if I were to join our team as the country head of Thailand. So all these things that maybe later on in your life you may feel like a bit deterred to do because you're giving them sort of free work, but I think I get now why, because it's only way to sort of see whether this person will churn out the kind of job and the caliber that you're really looking for. And whether they think the same way that you think, right? It's quite important to sort of be able to work together if you're such a small team. So it was a couple of rounds of that. In fact, I actually part-timed for them for a while before I made the jump. And we worked out this arrangement where I was going to be part-timing for them from the end of 2015 all the way to the first quarter of 2016. And I only made the jump in April. Only when it was a much more comfortable working environment. We understand each other. We sort of know what is what. And I started spending a lot of my leaves during work to go install locks on the side. That's when I realized that, hey, I think it's time to make the switch.
And so let's talk about the money, right? So you said that, yes, startups typically, they don't have the kind of resources to have a huge pay increment. Yeah. But for you, did they match your existing salary back then when you were in the bank? Or did they have to make up for a shortage in terms of equity? And how much was a pay cut for you, at least in terms of salary?
Yeah, great question. And I would say like they were quite fair because, I mean, being based out of Singapore, they definitely had the ability to be able to match a neighboring country's salary, right? Especially in Thailand. I think the rate in which we were making there was a lot less than what was a general like pay rate in Singapore. But as a whole package, right? One of the things that working in a bank you get like huge year-end bonuses. So I think as a whole package, we agreed quite early on it's not something that startups isn't a luxury to be doing, is to be paying someone a huge payout bonus because we're not profitable. So whatever they couldn't match in terms of the entire annual package, they gave in form of what equity was then worth. Yeah. So in terms of the cash itself, right? Considering myself staying on in Thailand and everything, I was more or less like the same. Just didn't have this benefits. I think one of the things also you would want to consider, especially if you're a lot more, you're not in your mid-20s, for the lack of a better word, is how are the benefits? Because you probably won't have health insurance. You probably won't have all this travel like benefits or basic healthcare packages that companies would have. And I think those were out-of-pocket expenses that you didn't really anticipate, but that you end up incurring as well. And it could be quite costly depending on what kind of things you end up facing in life, right? So I think that was it. I think only struggle sort of came in when we decided to suddenly change my role and sort of have me come to Singapore. And that was something that I didn't really expect. And so just to give you some context, right? I moved to Singapore and whatever they could pay me then, it was actually the same that the market research firm was paying me 5 years ago. So that gives you a bit of context on like how flat career jump it was. It wasn't a jump at all. I was making the same that I was making as a fresh grad at the market research firm, and that really was the most they could have paid. So it was all fair. Yeah.
So I just want to also go back to that stage where you make this jump, right? When it's time for you to make the jump from part-time to full-time, what were some of the factors that went through your head?
Yeah. I think at that point I was pretty determined to do it. I think that was an internal sort of gut feel as well, that this just seems like the future. You know, in the short span of me being involved in the part-time basis, I already felt like I was doing more than what I was doing outside. And so I think that was a main driver. Also at the same time, recall like on my first job, right, IBM, I made a lot of network contacts and peers within the tech industry. And so I reached out to a couple of my mentors who I look up to, and I sort of just gave them this whole lay down of what exactly I'm going through. And all of them, especially those who've been in the industry for like 10, 20 years, have all said, had I had the chance to do this, I would do it too. You know, and I think that sort of gave me a lot of confidence to go out and do this, right? Because you're talking to people who you respect in the industry, who basically have told you, had they been my age, had they had this opportunity, they would not hesitate to do it. And I think that was how I sort of made that decision. My parents, on the other hand, were not as supportive. I can understand why, right? I mean, you're sort of happy that your daughter or your children is now working in an established firm. They're probably safe for the next 10 to 20 years, or maybe they could just retire here and take a huge payout. And then when I told them that, hey, I was going to join this company, first of all, they've never heard about the company. They don't even understand, like, you know, trying to explain IoT to them. They have absolutely no idea. They didn't even understand what Airbnb was back then. So it took a lot of convincing. And to make matters worse, like, you know, after starting for 2 weeks, they realized that I had to fly. And within 3 months realized like, hey, maybe she's not going to come back. So that was really the main challenge, really, just to convince them that this is the way of the future. You got to trust me on this. You know, you raised me well, and I'll make a responsible decision. So I think, you know, I was excited, but at the same time, making sure to manage my parents' expectations. Yeah.
So it's been 5.5 years. Are they convinced now?
I think after about a couple of years, they realized, okay, this is not something she's just playing in with, and she's really for real. She's going to stay here for real. So they kind of got the message, and they're now on board. They're supportive of it and how far we've grown. And I think before COVID, the good thing was also they realized it was, you know, this role was bringing me back to Thailand a lot, because it's still a very growing real estate market. So they're happy that I spend a lot of time at home personally, and at the same time they see that I'm a lot happier here than I was before. Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier about you asked your respected mentors back at IBM.
Yeah.
So one thing is that you kept in touch with them,
Yeah.
so that's good on you. And I also want to dig in deeper on like how do you select mentors, right? Because it seems like what they say played a role in the decision. How do you pick your mentors? How would you consider someone to be a mentor? What separates a colleague from a mentor besides age, for example?
I consider very few people that I've sort of worked with and encountered like real mentors in my life. And I mean, I think I can only remember about 2 people that I've asked officially for them to sort of, I didn't really say that I wanted you to be my mentor, didn't want to put that on them, but I did say that, hey, I like really respect you a lot and I would come to you for advice. And this all happened when I was leaving the company. Wanted to just make it clear that, you know, I will be in touch. You will hear from me. And sometimes I would need your advice. And they were all very, very happy about it. How I selected those people that I communicated these messages out to, it came down to respect to the job, to how well they did the job that they were doing, to a lot of chemistry as well. I think, to me, because it's still like a personal, like interpersonal relationship, right? You still have to be able to willing to like talk to someone and share, things that you're going through with them. You would want to pick someone who you're comfortable with doing that with. So I ended up gravitating towards a couple of my project managers who were leading the projects in which I was placed on. And at the point in time, I'd been through about 7 projects, and there were two that really stood out. That I think they showed a lot of people leadership, a lot of thought leadership, and it was someone that, if we were at a data center at 2 a.m, if everyone's going home, they weren't going as well. And so it's today, I guess those are qualities in which I look in a leader too. I just didn't realize back then. And then because I no longer had a formal working relationship with them, I didn't want that relationship to stop. So I decided to convert it into a more like informal one, where from time to time, and I still do, although we don't stay in touch all the time, I do randomly ping them once in a blue moon to just give them an update on what I'm doing. And that's how it really came about. Yeah.
That's the privilege and luxury that we had, right?
Yeah.
Before COVID.
Yeah.
That we had to, there were a lot more opportunities to interact with your colleagues, with your leaders in the company. And then now that this work from home situation, at least most of us are working from home. I think it's a lot harder now for the folks who just join a new company to sort of like see potential mentors at work, to see and observe this kind of traits in your leaders. Any advice on like people working now or early career professionals? How should people go about finding mentors now? Any advice on this?
Well, I suppose now that I've been with the company for quite some time and grown into the organizational structure, my advice to anyone newly joining a company who feels like, wow, there's so many people who've been around for so long, how do you break in? Because I can understand that's probably what they're going through. It's a lot easier than you think. We are individuals, after all. We love company. I think most of us do. I don't speak for everyone, but I think most of us do. I think fresh grads inject a lot of life into a company, and we love working with them, sort of hearing opinions from them, having them join part of conversations. And it may not be the case all the time that it feels like we're including them in, but that has nothing to do with them. It's just we're so boggled down by everything that we're doing that we just cannot find a time of the day to include them in a lot of the things that we want to. But it doesn't mean that, we don't want it to happen. We do want it to happen. How do you identify mentors? That's a more tricky question, especially if you don't have a in-person working relationship, because that for me was quite important, right? Like you can speak to someone via Zoom all day long, but probably not be able to build the type of quality relationship unless you really were in front of a person and you just see them all the time. I'd say the good thing is we're coming out of it. And you can now start putting emphasis on socializing a bit more with those people that you have been just interfacing with them on Zoom or whatever platform you've been using. And you before you do select that, I'd say like it's important. It's important to really like meet them in person. If you really can't, talking to them about things like outside work. I think that's how I really bonded with all the mentors I had as well. Like, like all those sleepless nights that we're sitting just trying to like, kill time in data center. We ended up talking about every single thing, from travel trips to books you've read to everything. And I think you do find a lot of more similarities in the people that you both tend to gravitate towards. And like those maybe that are not so similar or share some common experiences. It's not like they're not great in what they do. They just might be a better mentor for someone else more similar to them. It's very important to pick someone that you have a rapport with. I really feel that's the easiest way to build relationship that's genuine. Yeah.
How has your journey and your role evolved since 5.5 years ago?
What a journey. I would say to describe.
What are some of the highlights?
Uh,
What are some of the highlights? Yeah.
the
Give us
highlights.
two.
The highlights. Well, I mean, I think closing the first, because I'm in a commercial role, right? Like, I mean, at the end of the day, business development is just really doing sales. So in a commercial role, like closing that first account for the company, which is with a real estate developer, was to by far still the highlight. Because I think without that, we probably would have had a lot more struggles as a startup. So I'd say that was one, and I think as a company we felt it as well that we're finally going in the right direction. We're building product that someone actually wants to buy, and it feels validated in through and through the whole organization. Um, and the second highlight had to be you were around then, so it probably was it 2018, 2019 at the end of the year where we organized the distributor conference, and we flew in most of our core distributors around the world to sort of have a conference for the first time with us in Singapore. And I say that that's a highlight because it sort of gave us the understanding how wide our outreach has been, how strong our culture has sort of transcended that. A lot of these people flew in at their own budget because they really felt like they wanted to be part of something bigger, and they are. And I think I speak for the customers, but also for ourselves, right? I think it was a 2-3 day 2-3 day of a lot of fun, a lot of work that internal Igloo homies, who we call ourselves, had a chance to sort of see the impact of the jobs that they do. And to me, those two had to be the biggest highlights. Yeah.
So if you look back at your career,
Yeah.
I would imagine the biggest switch is probably from a bank to an early stage tech startup. What were some of your knowledge, skills, or maybe even personality traits that help you with the transition to your role at Igloo Company?
A few that come to mind, definitely, taking initiative, because I think let's be clear here, right? Like when you join a startup, even though you apply for it and there's a job description that comes with it, chances are, like after the first week of onboarding, you're on your own. You come up with your own, yeah, 9 to 5 activities you want to do. You create your own work experience, like what you want to achieve. You're pretty much on your own, and that's not the same for a corporate structure, right? As a corporate structure, there's rules that you have to follow. There's KPIs that you got to achieve. You're just replacing. Chances are you're replacing someone else who was there before you. But when you're in a growth stage company, they're hiring you for a new function they've never had before. So you're going in to sort of create new jobs, new tasks, new capabilities that a company didn't have. So I think when I was both at IBM and at the bank, I did already have that sort of quality in me where I always wanted to sort of do more, take a lot more initiative to do side projects, try out new things. So I think that sort of carried on. What else? I'd say I was quite adaptable in a room of people. I'm not shy to sort of make my opinions heard or talk about things, and I think that goes well through a networking type of event. When you really are young and no one knows about you, the more you talk about what you do, one person hears about it, then the next person hears about it, and then that's just more and more people hear about it. I think that sort of helped out with that with the company as well. Last sort of trait that is good is adaptability. Like I said, right? I think when you're in the company, you come in as one role, but you're really doing about 10 things. You really are, and there's no such thing as this is not my job. It's probably you're not in the right place. If you find yourself saying that within the first 6 months, you're probably not at the right place, because you're going to be end up doing things that sure it's not your job, but it has to be done. So it's either going to be you, it's going to be your friend next to you, who also feels that it's not his or her job as well. So I think adaptability and being able to understand that this is what it takes to do it, and I completely was open to doing that. I think my mindset was aligned, and that's why I am still here. yeah.
What's your advice for people who are considering a career switch, or that's part A? Part B is people who might want to who are thinking about switching to a tech startup. What's your advice for them?
So I'd say it really depends on how young you are or how more senior you are in your career. So if you're just starting out, right, and you already have that inclination, I'd say start early. Go and join. Do what you're doing, right? I mean, I think looking back, joining IBM and the bank gave me one thing that Igloohome wouldn't give me, which is discipline. Getting in front of my desk at 8 a.m. in the morning, making sure I'm there and just servicing everything that needs to be. Like that discipline of like a work structure and the ethics around it is really something that I think a corporate life gives you well. If you are younger and you are now in a corporate structure, take out what you can, the most, learn the structure, learn how processes are done. But if there is an inclination for you to join a young startup, like an early stage one, I think you should do it early. You realize that you have a lot more options if you do it early. I think companies are also willing to train you a lot more if you're young and you're in your early years of your career, because there's a high chance that you will stick around, right? And you'll be part of that journey. That being said, I think in the recent 2-3 years, Igloocompany has been recruiting a lot more experienced personnel because we're now in a growth stage. So we can no longer just add fresh grads into our organization. We need to start hiring experienced people. So if you find yourself sort of in that sector, it is not at that difficult a switch, to be honest. I mean, I think people think tech is a completely different industry, but to be honest, I mean, I think when we first started talking about this podcast, fintech, prop tech, what else? Like agri-tech, like all these things, right? Is something / tech. So tech is an underlying sort of disruptor across every industry. So whether you're in retail, whether you're even in F&B, if you wanted to make that jump, it's not as difficult as you think. In fact, right, someone being in this industry, if someone came out from a more traditional property sector, we would view them as an asset. We view them as an asset because they know how that industry works, the industry that we're trying to disrupt. So go in to this sort of career change and then see yourself as more like an asset than someone who needs to learn how tech works. Focus on what you have, and you have that experience that the rest of the co-founders probably don't have, right? Because they probably started off in their 20s, but you do. So because you've been working in the industry for so long, and I see this now a lot more prominent in the last few years of a growth stage company. Yeah.
Last 2 questions, I promise. So if you were to look back at yourself being a fresh grad, what would be your advice? What would be one advice? What would be one thing that you might do differently? What would you tell this fresh grad version of Bess?
I was thinking about this, and the biggest piece of advice was to not be so hard on yourself to figure out what you wanted to do at such a young age. And this is so true of not just people we are. I think every college graduate or university graduate will go through the same experience, because now that you have a university degree, you feel like you need to make your mark on the world immediately. Pick a career, stick with it. And that's the misconception. And I realize that now, having not gone through so dramatic of a shift, but still enough to make me realize hey, my worries back then weren't as life-changing as I thought they were going to be. I thought it was the end of the world. I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do at the age of 22. And that's what I would tell myself, that you didn't have to figure it out back then. That the world wouldn't fall apart if you had no idea still. Yeah.
Thank you. It's quite inspiring. My last question is this: any books, movie, or podcast, or YouTube video or documentary you find yourself recommending to people recently in the last 6 months, and why?
I read a lot, and that's a funny thing, right? Because side story, and just probably won't make it, but I just want to tell you as a friend, Actually, the mentor that I picked from IBM was one of them was the interviewer in my first round, and at the end of the conversation, he wanted to throw in like a bonus round, and then he asked me what were the last 5 books I read, and I was a reader, so I came up with the 5 books almost immediately. And then later on, he like highly recommended that they hired me because like it was quite clear that anyone else he asked either couldn't come up with 1 or 2, or just like started like was clearly we're making things up. And I think it was a side story, but what I wanted to answer was I'm always an avid fan of reading. Always have a book next to me. In fact, I'm reading so my boyfriend's a big fan of Manchester United, so he made me read this book called Leading by Alex Ferguson. I just finished it. So I just finished it. I mean, I've been indulging myself in leadership books because I find myself in this certain time in my career as well where I started need to sort of have a lot more of these traits. So I've been reading about Bob Iger running Disney. I've been reading about Alex Ferguson running a football team. Reading about Howard Schultz running Starbucks, and forget the name of the guy who started Nike, but all sorts of like Shoe Dog. I remember Shoe Dog. I forgot the name of the guy. But it's
Phil Knight.
Yes, Phil Knight. Correct. Yeah. So a lot of these leadership books that I read recently, and I'm now like an avid fan of autobiographies. I feel like when you read about these books, you really get a true sense of who they are. And it doesn't feel like a management textbook, even though you really take out a lot of management like learnings and key points from them. They're just there to sort of share with them the experience, and it's really up to you what you take out. So these are what I've been reading recently, and I really recommend it. A couple of podcasts that I listen to regularly. One is actually by TechCrunch. It's called Equity. So I subscribe to that on Spotify. And their tagline is, we break down the numbers behind the headlines. And they really do that. So, like when Airbnb went public about a year ago, they had like a 30-minute dedicated podcast on how do you read the S1 of Airbnb. And they break down on the run rate of Airbnb, the projections and everything. So I think it's if you're in tech and you're interested in the financials of tech, you would love that podcast. And I read a lot of news around it. There's one cool journalism publication. Email, sort of an email journalism that I follow, and that's called Morning Brew. And they send out like weekly, daily snippets of what's happening across the financial markets as well as the tech scene. And they're bite-sized articles, so they're very easy to sort of read on the go. So these ones, I think, on the top of my head.
No, well, wonderful. I was asking for one, but you give plenty.
you touch. I could go on for a while. We talk about like things that I've read. Yes.
Yeah. I was going to ask you to pick one book, right? But I guess it's going to be hard for you to pick one out of the books that you recommended. You want to give it a shot?
The Ride of a Lifetime by Bob Iger. I think that comes top of my list. Yeah.
And very quickly, why?
He's a true example of someone who started from the bottom and found himself at the top. And he didn't have a traditional entrepreneur experience like Phil Knight or the other guys, but he put in the legwork. He knew what he was doing, and with preparation and with luck, whatever you would deem it, he became the CEO of Disney. And he's someone who's been around at the beginning of when Disney, or at that point in time, ABC was just a broadcasting business, to now like Disney and Disney Plus, a true tech company. I give him a lot of credit for being able to himself transform himself to be the CEO of 2 very different companies, and also having the gut to do what it takes, right? Acquire companies, Pixar, Marvel, Lucasfilm, box, like everything to get to where he is. And it's not a book just for tech. It is a book for anyone who wants to learn about what it really takes to be successful. And you gotta just put it. There's no shortcut to it. I really think that's what it is. Yeah.
What is the role of luck? We probably need another episode for this. And the other thought in my head is this. I've not read the book. I think I should after what you said. And one thing that I'm very curious that I also want to put up and feature in this podcast are people who are early startup employees. And as much as you could have a charismatic, smart, intelligent, hardworking, or lucky CEO or a driver or founder of a company that pushed the company to great heights, but I also think that a lot of credit goes to the early startup employees who formed their first team in the startup when it was nothing. And I think to kind of round it off, not that I want to stop you from talking, is that I truly think that you encapsulate that, right? For me, in my opinion, I was in Igloocompany for 2 years, and I really admired you, your drive, and looking at how you speak today. I think the drive and fire is still there, if not even stronger. Yeah, I think a lot of credit, and I think a lot of stories that I want to unearth and discover through the perspective of early startup employees. Maybe I didn't capture all of that, but I think talking to you about your decision to move into Igloohome when it was nothing, and the kind of changes that you've made to your life, not very much to your parents' happiness in the process. I also found it very inspiring, and I honestly hope and this will add a lot of value to the audience listening to this.
Hey, it's been fun. First time doing a podcast. It's been fun.